Okay, so for those of you on in other campuses, hi, you can now hear me. The folks in the room don't need this. You do. We're fortunate to have one of our, in fact, one of our only two independent board members from GoDaddy with us today. Scott and I and the team just went through 2 days of board meetings to get us set up for 2016, which was enthusiastically great. And grueling at the same. Betsy's laughing. It was grueling, and we're ready to go into 2016 with a vengeance. Betsy Rafael is one of those people when you meet her the first time, you just kind of fall in love with her and say, "What a great person! A real person, been in the trenches, has done amazing things in the technology industry, going back, really, 20, 30 years." She was most recently I'll call it the chief accounting officer, controller at Apple. She was a two-timer at Apple, a returner. She was also the same function at Cisco. She's on the board of Autodesk. She is incredibly well-versed in scaling public companies from not so big to, holy God, that's huge. And I tell you, she's so fun to have on the board because her voice is always of reason and of moderation and of experience, and I value her tremendously. First woman on our board as well, and frankly, I'd love to have more people just like her, and eventually we will. But Betsy, I'd like to bring you up.
Thank you.
Betsy Rafael, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
You don't need this.
I don't. I have my own special microphone. So good morning, and good morning to those of you from different locations. And actually, I'm going to definitely come back if I get more introductions like that from Blake. But truly, I'm honored and humbled always to be asked to talk and to share a little bit of kind of my path and my history. So kind of the venue or the format for the next hour is hopefully I'm going to tell you a little bit about what makes me unique for the next 45 minutes or so, and then we'll have an opportunity to do a little bit of Q&A. You probably know a little bit about kind of my bio, but I'm going to start with that and just give you a little sense of kind of how I ended up kind of here standing before you as a GoDaddy board member. So I studied accounting in college. I really didn't know what that meant, and they kind of directed me to go work in public accounting. So my first job out of college was working for, and this shows my age a little bit because it was Arthur Young, and that was back when they had 8 accounting firms, and now it's the final 4. And so Arthur Young is Ernst & Young. But I kind of started and kind of earned my chops a little bit in public accounting. And at the same time, quickly realized, I think about 39 seconds after the start of my career in public accounting, that I didn't necessarily want to stay there and be a partner. So, and I was already working with companies like Apple and Atari, and so they were doing really cool, fun things. And I think the assistants at Apple were making more money than I was as an accountant. And so I decided pretty quickly I wanted to get a little closer to the action. And so after I earned my stripes and kind of got my CPA, I went to Apple for the first time. And I spent about 8 years there. And I did a variety of different sorts of roles. I was a financial analyst in the sales organization. I was in internal audit. I was in the IT organization as a business analyst. I was in the customer service organization where I basically brought a product to market in the form of a hard drive upgrade. So I did a little bit of everything. And from there, I decided I had kind of officially grown up. I think at that point I was 28 and went off and spent some time at Sun Microsystems, which after being at Apple I actually thought was a little boring. So I didn't stay there that long. I then went to Silicon Graphics, where I was there for almost 8 years. And it was a really fun company. It was a really messed up company, but it was fun. And I started out as kind of a manager in the finance function, and when I left, I was the CFO. And partly, I learned a lot of my lessons in this particular case of what not to do as opposed to what to do. Because instead of growing up and to the right, like many of my subsequent experience, this was a little bit like we were trying to save our way into prosperity. And that's not so fun. But learned a lot as a leader. From there, I did my 39 seconds in a startup and decided that being adult supervision wasn't necessarily what I was meant to do in life. And I went back and I was a CFO of a public company in the kind of communication space. And then from there, I went kind of back and spent 5 years at Cisco as the controller. Also ran a lot of the planning, strategic planning functions, supported all the M&A activities, and then I went to Apple again. They kept trying to hire me back at Apple, and finally I said yes. And I went back in 2007, right before we launched the phone. And I kind of tell people these numbers just for context. When I went back there, the company was doing $24 billion a year in revenue. When I retired from there in 2012, we did $156 billion a year in revenue. So there was a lot of scaling to go on, needless to say. So that's a little bit about kind of my journey. 3 years ago, I decided I wanted to be able to fit a few more things in my day. And so currently I'm on kind of 3 corporate boards. I'm also, since I started out at Santa Clara, I'm on the board of trustees at Santa Clara University. I try to play a little golf. Certainly I got a long way to go to get as good as Blake, but it's certainly aspirational. But I'm having a lot of fun. But that's kind of my journey. And everybody's journey is a little bit different. The one thing I always like to say is there's no one path. There's no one path if you're a finance person, if you're an engineer. Everybody's kind of process and everybody's journey of how they end up there is a little bit different, and that's okay. Everybody's skill set is a little bit different. I come from kind of the business, finance, operational perspective. Many of you may have engineering backgrounds. You can be like Mike Holt and be an expert in all things tax. You can be in the marketing, PR. There's a number of different things that you can do, but everybody's unique. I also like to say that everybody's secret sauce is a little bit different. And when I say secret sauce, what do I mean? What I really mean is, kind of what makes you unique. What talents do you have? What assets? What differentiates you from the rest of your peers or the rest of the people who have similar skill sets? It's really about understanding kind of what makes you different and what makes you unique. And in order to do that, you have to know yourself. Oftentimes we focus, and a lot of the traditional kind of management development focuses on, you need to know where your weaknesses are, and you need to focus on those. Okay, you probably do at least need to be self-aware enough to know what your gaps are. But one of the things I've also learned is don't forget the things that you're really good at. Because we do bring something, all of us as individuals bring something that's unique, and it's about capitalizing on that. And as I think about that, kind of when I think about my recipe for my secret sauce, there's really 3 areas. One, it's about leadership. The second is about collaboration. And the third is about mentorship. And I'm going to talk about each one of those areas and give you a little sense of kind of what that looks like for me. And if I start with leadership, what do I mean? Well, starting out, it's all about strategic focus. And actually, this is true whether you're an individual contributor or you manage a team of 1,000 people. I always used to say that management is getting things done right, and leadership is doing the right things. And that's true, again, whether you're an individual or you're managing a team. You got to focus on making sure, whether it's you as an individual, your 5 people, your 10 people, your 10,000 people, are all focused on going in the right direction, okay? And the more people you have, the more complex that gets. And when I talked about kind of driving scale in these organizations, it's a little bit like trying to change the tires when you're going 85 miles an hour down the freeway, because stuff's happening really fast. At the same time, you have to be able to get people working towards a common goal and a common vision. And so that turned out to be something that I had a little bit of an inherent kind of capability and desire, but I also spent a lot of time learning about how to make sure that we're in alignment, how to make sure that the teams were working on the same goals, how to make sure that we have a common purpose, we have a common vision. Oftentimes people think, oh, that's just soft stuff, it doesn't really matter. When you're trying to make choices and prioritize and get people all moving in the same direction, it's not just soft stuff. If you don't do that, you really, really won't make that happen. It just won't get done. So strategic focus is something that is critically important. Again, and oftentimes people look at me and they say, well, that makes sense if you're managing big teams. But again, as an individual, make sure that you're doing the right stuff. Make sure that you're focused on the right goals. Are you clear about what it is that you're supposed to be getting done in the next 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? So strategic focus for me was something that I never lost sight of. And it's also one of those things that's easy to forget. You wake up in the morning, you got 37 items on your to-do list. Call Mary, send Joe the spreadsheet, kind of do this, do that. And then there's like, oh, get everybody aligned on our strategic priorities. Okay, that's always the one that goes to the bottom of the list because it's hard. And it's not something you can do by yourself. And so it's very easy to just say, oh yeah, we'll do that later. It's really important not to lose sight of the strategic stuff and the tactical stuff. Both have to happen in order for you to be successful. And certainly that was my experience. Having said that, making sure you're focused on the right stuff doesn't eliminate getting stuff done. And I used to have a person that worked for me, and we used to call it get shit done, excuse my French. But it was like, check, okay? We can't lose sight of we have to get stuff done. And it kind of goes back to if we've done a good job as a leader and being strategically focused, then we're pretty clear about how that translates into the getting stuff done. And it's also sometimes about being creative about how to get stuff done. I remember one of my roles at Apple early on, I was in this kind of program management role, and we were supposed to get this cross-functional team together, and we were supposed to come up with a business requirements definition of what the product was supposed to be, and they were like, oh yeah, we're going to meet for an hour once a week. And I'm like, if we meet for an hour once a week, we're going to be doing that for the next 150 years, and we're still never going to get anything done. We have to figure out a different way how to get stuff done. So I said, okay, well, this sounds easy. I'm going to get all 25 of those people, and we're going to come together in a room for 3 days, and we're not going to leave until it's done. Now, you may think, well, that's kind of obvious. That's kind of simple. Again, it's trying to think different around, just doing things the way that everybody always did them. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work. So sometimes you really have to keep your eye on the prize, which is around, kind of getting things done. So it's a combination, again, going back to making sure you are focused on the right things, but getting things done. So both of those are kind of equally important. And the third element of leadership is around, kind of communications. Communications is also one of those things I know as I got increasingly larger teams, if I didn't have a plan about how I was going to think about getting to the 1,400 people in the organization around the world, if I didn't have a plan for when I was going to have a communications meeting or a brown bag lunch or a strategic all hands, I'm caught up in those 27 things on my to-do list, and I never get there. So communications is always about, you have to have a plan, and you have to be thoughtful about what, when, and how, and to which audience, and what's the forum, and how you're going to communicate. And I happen to know that that's one of the things that Blake has really done for GoDaddy in the last few years, is be really thoughtful about, when do we communicate, who do we communicate to, how do we do it. Really, really important. It's not something that happens unless you have a plan. You have to be thoughtful about how you do that. The other thing about communications is, it's so important, kind of tying back to kind of the strategic focus and getting things done, that it's not enough to have a great idea. If you have a great idea about something that we should be focused on as a company or as a team or as an organization, that's great. But if you don't know how to communicate it, then no one knows you have a great idea. So it's really, really important to what differentiates you to be able to communicate both verbally, in writing, to be able to articulate kind of what you're trying to say. Really important to be a good communicator. And probably the biggest lesson for me from a communication standpoint is you gotta be real. There's nothing that people hate worse than seeing up somebody going, wah, 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 wah. And they're kind of giving you the the company spiel. You're like, I could have read that. I didn't, and at the same time, there's times as leaders, we wish we could tell everything to everybody, and we'd like people to know all the stuff we know, and sometimes it's not quite that simple. But you also have to be able to communicate in a way that's authentic and real. If you're trying to communicate in a way that people either don't believe you, they don't trust you, they're not sure that you're telling the truth, they're not sure that you're being honest, then communications don't make a lot of sense. I happen to be one of those people that kind of can't help myself. I have a filter, but sometimes the filters probably doesn't work as well as it should, so I'm pretty out there and pretty open and honest. But actually, if I think about that kind of in retrospect, I think it's something that has actually been a unique attribute, in a sense that I've been willing to be myself, been willing to be open and honest, and I think it's particularly important when you're in leadership roles to be able to be, an authentic communicator. So kind of thinking back again around leadership, it's not just one of those items. It's making sure you're focused strategically on the right things, making sure you're not kind of getting your eye off the prize of getting things done, and kind of wrapping that up from, the context of communication. They all kind of interrelate. They all kind of tie together, and it's hard to kind of do one without the other. I mean, all three of those elements kind of work together. The next piece of that is around collaboration. I think that as we know in companies, and it doesn't matter if you're a startup and you got 10 guys, or you're a company that got 5,000, or you got 100,000, it's not one person that gets things done. When you do your job, it's usually not done with, your job isn't necessarily completed at that point. Results and getting things done really happen through other people. So collaborating and working with our peers and people in our organization, and the people that are either upstream or downstream of the work that we do, is critically important. And sometimes we don't think about that, particularly as an individual, we think, okay, well, I'm going to do my job this way, and this is how I do it, and this is how I like to do it. Well, maybe the person that is the customer or the end user of your work, maybe there are some other things that they need to be doing or they need in order to allow their job to be more effective. And so really understanding, again, whether you're an individual or whether you're a team, that you have to work with others in order to get things done. This is also one of those things that over time, the people who are more effective at getting along with others are usually more successful because, and that doesn't mean they don't have to be good at getting their job done, but people who are really good as individuals, but there's broken bodies all over the place, that's not so fun. And at some point people say, well, you know what, I have to weigh how smart they are versus how painful it is, and kind of all the destruction that's in the path of this individual. So, collaboration and being able to work with others is really important. And I know that may sound simple, but it's not always simple. And at the same time, we don't probably, I'm sure that all of you don't like each one of your coworkers exactly the same amount. I'm sure that there are some that you would like to bring home to the family, and there are some that you'd like to go do things with, and maybe there's one or two that you're not going to go out and have a beer with, okay? And probably throughout your career, there's maybe one or two, maybe 3 or 4. I'm sure I've had a few of those. You don't have to be best friends with everybody, but you have to be able to work with everyone. And that's also one of those things that when I think back over my kind of 30-year career, those are things that people remember, okay? When somebody calls up and says, hey, do you know this Betsy Rafael person? And if I was one of those people that, kind of knocked down a lot of people along the way, they're going to know that. That's going to be something that's so when Blake came and talked to me about being on a board, and I said, oh yeah, I'm great, I get along with everybody, it would have taken him about 39 nanoseconds to find out whether that was true or not. So collaboration, working to drive results through others, extremely important, really, really important. Kind of the other aspect of that is if you think about kind of the way things get done, okay, think about what GoDaddy does. We provide services to small business customers. Okay, well, it's not the product teams that own that process from start to finish. It's not the customer care organization that owns that product start to finish. It's not finance. It's not, yes, Blake may be accountable at the end of the day, but every function has an element of providing that process, of providing services to the end customer. So by definition, you have to work with people across the functions in order to deliver really the core purpose of the company, which is to provide services and products to small business customers. And so we have to have this lens of it's not engineering, it's not finance, it's not C3, it's all of us together that deliver that kind of end product or end service to the customer. We have to think about how to collaborate, how to work across functions, to understand what's important to C3, to what's important to finance in terms of data that they need on the back end. We have to think about this in a much more holistic fashion than, okay, I'm in finance, this is my lens, this is what I need. We have to think about it much more broadly than that. And the more we can do that, again, the more we're going to see the bigger picture, and we're going to be focused on, again, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do, again, is provide these unique products and services to those small business customers. And so we have to have that lens if we're going to be effective at delivering that. The other element of kind of collaboration, and I alluded to it earlier, is it's a little bit about, at the end result of working 30 years across many tech companies and lots of different functions and collaborating across lots of different organizations, it's all about the network. It's all about who you know. It's also when you're going to be working in a company, the more people you know, okay, if I'm going to collaborate and I got to go work with marketing to get my job done, if I know somebody in marketing, it's a lot easier for me to call them up and say, hey, I need some help. I need this information. Great, yeah, I'm happy to help you. And so it's really, really important to think about your kind of collective network of people that help you get your job done across the company. And the people that are more effective at knowing who to call, because again, the company, GoDaddy's a pretty good sized company, but we still have probably a few elements of being a startup. What do you think? Probably. And so I'm sure all these processes are not perfectly documented, and it's not always clear who we call or when we call or how we call. And so a lot of that comes down to us as individuals. We got to go figure out who do we need to work with to get our job done. And the more people we know and the more of those positive interactions that we have, the more we're going to be able to be effective and be perceived as, oh yeah, make sure you work with this person because they know how to get things done. They care about what my job is, and we can work together effectively. The other piece of it, again, going back, is it's the cumulative effect in terms of your network. You oftentimes hear, I get asked a lot, whether it's in a women's conference or just in general, so how do you network? Do you need to go how to learn how to play golf? And I'm like, well, if you want to play golf, that's great, go learn how. But don't learn how if you think that somehow is just going to make you network better if you don't like golf, okay? I happen to like golf. At the same time, networking really, again, is the cumulative impact of all of those people that you work with kind of in your journey, in your path, in all of your jobs. And the more of those that can be positive interactions, at the end of the day, when you look back, you say, wow, I have a pretty good network. One of the other things I always tell people from working with others is never burn a bridge. Even, I'm sure you've had probably one or two bosses maybe that you didn't like. I maybe had one or two that I didn't like. Doesn't matter. You know what? And at the end of the day, if there's a company that you decide you don't want to work at, there's a place you are, there's a boss you have, great. But you know what? You hold your head high. If you figure out it's time for you to go do something else, you deliver as if it was your most favorite job ever. And so then when people ask about you, oh, it's too bad, then they left. As opposed to, you know what? I'm tired of being here, forget it, I'm going to leave tomorrow, and I don't care whether you have anybody to do the job for the next 2 weeks, I can't deal with it. That ultimately comes back, if not 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. So it's not an insignificant thing. And, to be fair, I learned that lesson one time very, very painfully. It was in a situation where I was working with the CEO that was really tough, and it was time for me to go do something else. And what I wanted to do was go home that day and never come back. And I didn't do that. I said, you know what, can't do that to my team, can't do that to the company. I need to stick my head up high, and I need to show up until it's time for me to exit in a way that makes sense. It's not always easy to do. But that's true whether you're the CFO, the CEO, the program manager, the video person, whatever it is. Again, I think it's important to not lose sight of, sometimes we just have to do what we got to do, and we got to go, kind of go on from there. Very, very important as we think about holistically. The other piece that's important is mentoring, and I want to talk a little bit about the journey for me personally. When I started out working and started to get at a higher level in the organization, people said, well, you need to mentor, you need to help other women in the organization. And my first question, honestly, was like, why? Why? Because I grew up actually, my mom was an advertising executive. My grandmother was a real estate agent. I didn't know that wasn't normal for everybody to do that. So I didn't actually figure out that I was a woman in that sense for a long time. I was like, okay, well, like, why is this a big deal? I mean, I know that sounds a little naive, and maybe I was, but I was like, mentor, like, why do we need to do that? And there was also an element at one point where I was like, I kind of want to stay under the radar. And if I'm out there joining the Women in Technology group and, raising my hand and doing all this stuff, wow, like maybe I want to stay a little bit more low key. And so my first kind of journey in that really was about, God, why? Why would I do that? And so it took me a while, and there was a couple of things that happened. One, I did have some other women in the organization that were more senior to me, and they said, you know what, you've had an opportunity to get to some of these roles and to have an experience that not everybody gets to have. And you know what? They said, you quite frankly have a responsibility, to help others. If you think about kind of the history of kind of how things have worked in the business world, and the analogy I would use is in the boardroom. Until a number of years ago, the CEO basically hired their 3 golf buddies and said, come on, and you're a board member, okay? So it was all about their friends, okay? Or people that, kind of hired people within their company, they usually hired people who had like skill sets, like experiences, like thoughts, because, gosh, is it easier to go hire people that think like me than hire 3 people who have a completely different perspective? Oh my gosh, we never get anything done because we're like, well, wait a minute, we got to talk about this perspective. At the end of the day, it's better for the company to have those different points of view. However, that's not necessarily kind of how things evolved. And so, I think, and oftentimes when we think of it from a woman perspective, I always thought of it, I got to hire the right person for the job, or I got to hire the right person for this particular role. That's still true today. And at the same time, a lot of men got into their positions because, again, they had mentors, they had people that helped them who had like thoughts and like experiences. And so, I moved from saying, why should I be a mentor, to being, why not? Why not be a mentor? Because other people, and for me, mentorship was not always about a structured or a formal mentorship. I go back to this other conversation we had about collaboration and the cumulative network of working with people. I worked with people and developed advocates. Okay, they were people that worked with me. They might have been a boss in a prior role. They became advocates for me. Oftentimes people say, well, do I need a formal mentor? That's a personal choice. I think both informal and formal mentoring is important. But for me as a leader, again, I went through a personal kind of transformation. Was, why do I need to mentor? To, okay, I think I do need to mentor. And actually, I got to the point where it wasn't just, okay, I'll mentor, which was kind of where I was in the middle. It was like, we must, okay? I feel a sense of responsibility as a leader to help others. And why also is that important? I think in my personal experience, sometimes, I have seen situations where women can be hardest on other women. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be direct. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't be helpful and we shouldn't try to coach. But at the same time, we shouldn't be trying to compete with each other to the detriment of one another. This is a great organization that you guys have started here. But it's also important that we help each other. Sometimes helping others is becoming an advocate for somebody. Sometimes helping somebody is being able to give somebody feedback that says, hey, wait a second, that experience or that interaction or the way you communicated in this particular meeting wasn't as effective as it could have been. And that's hard. It's hard enough for people to give feedback to people that work for them. Then you think about, well, why am I going to go have, it's like, why do I want to go have a conversation with my teenager and tell them something that they're not doing right? It's kind of the same way, like, why do I want to go have a conversation with somebody and tell them, you know, how they could be better? It's a gift. It's a gift. And I would encourage all of us to kind of take on that responsibility of saying, let's be a mentor. And it's not just a gender. It's not just a gender thing. It's all of us. You know, going back to being a leader, if we're going to be good leaders and we're going to be good managers, we're going to be good mentors, because mentors are about coaching. And so mentoring, for me, also became a way of developing my leadership and management skills, because I was doing it not just for people who worked directly for me, but I did start to get people who asked me to be a mentor. And in order to do that, again, you can't just tell people what they want to hear. If somebody asks them, well, how do you think I did in this presentation? And, oh, yeah, you were great. And if they weren't great, you aren't doing them any favors by telling them that there were not things that they could do better. So really think about that. You know, mentorship really is a gift. My personal journey is I went from why do I want to do it to why we have to do it. And it became something that was very unique to me, and is something that I believed in, and actually something that I still do today. It's not always in a formal context, but I still mentor people. Sometimes people ask for help, sometimes it just happens naturally. But my own journey on that was it evolved. So if I go back and think about, you know, I said my recipe was about leadership, collaboration, and mentorship, which really kind of all tie together. That was about kind of my, you know, my secret sauce. Okay, what made me different? Now, were there some things that probably I could have done better in my career? Absolutely. Again, no one's exempt from being able to do things better. But I also was self-aware enough that I knew what I was good at, and I knew, and if there were areas, for example, that were not necessarily my strength, then I would complement my team with those skill sets. And so it's important, again, to know what you're good at and to know where maybe you don't have the skill sets. But it's also, you know, again, contrary to what a lot of times the conventional management development is, don't forget about those strengths when you're focusing on, you know, working on those areas that you're not as comfortable with or you're not as good at. Because at the end of the day, the secret sauce is what's going to make you, you know, stand out. So know your strengths, again, and that's really, again, how to be self-aware. Know what I'm good at, know what I'm not good at. You know, be confident, okay? Very, very important. I always kind of, I always had this view, and I'm not necessarily telling everybody that this is the way, but I always thought I was right. So somebody would, well, what do you think about this? Well, I think this. Now, hopefully you need to know a little something if you're gonna have that perspective. But again, confidence is also, it's hard to teach confidence. But confidence for me was something that is very important. Sometimes we have to work at learning confidence, but confidence is very, very important, and it translates into how we communicate. Be self-aware, be honest. That goes back to the being authentic. No one wants to hear, again, the blah, 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 something that they want people to be open, honest, direct, authentic, be real. I always told people when I coach them on a communication standpoint, I'm not trying to teach you to go to Broadway. Okay, so don't get up there and all of a sudden have to sound perfect, look perfect, and have you start to say things that are completely unauthentic with who you are. That's not helpful. And so it's all about making sure that if you're going to work on some things from a communication standpoint, but it still comes down to being authentic with who you are. You know, have a point of view. Really, really important. And one of there's a great quote actually that I like from Madeleine Albright, and she uses this context of, you know, women have to be active listeners and interrupters. But when you interrupt, you better know what you're talking about. And there's nothing more relevant than when you get into a boardroom full of guys, okay, and you know, all these people are strong, confident, they have a point of view, they're smart, they have opinions. And if you try to stand up and say, I have a little question, and oftentimes I'm not really sure if this is right or not, but you have to get right in there, and you have to have a point of view, you have to have confidence. And sometimes that's as much about whether they perceive you know what you're talking about as anything else. That if you kind of qualify and squish all your thoughts before you even get the idea out, oh yeah, that's not right. Very, very important, you know, to kind of have a point of view and say it with confidence. So kind of the moral of the story is we all have a secret sauce, and I think we should use it liberally. And again, your secret sauce is going to be a little bit different than mine. And there's not a right or wrong secret sauce, but just know what it is. And sometimes we have to be a little self-reflective and get a little feedback from others to know what that is. But again, that's my journey. Some of this may work for you, some of it may not, doesn't matter. Take what you want, throw out the rest. That's just a little bit about kind of my personal journey. And so with that, I'd actually like to open it up to questions. Okay. I'm going to wait till the microphones get to the...
Thanks. For all of our remote employees, please look for GDWIT on link if you have questions, and we'll read them to Betsy. And we do have one to get us started from remote. It says, what kind of specific challenges have you faced and overcome as a woman in a field that has long been heavily male?
So I think that's a great question. You know, I think there's many things that you overcome, but you know, part of my personal approach to things is I didn't focus on those challenges. I didn't focus on, well, you know, I didn't get promoted because I was a woman, or this person doesn't like me because I'm a woman. And I continued to believe that, and I still believe this today, that if I am successful at what I do, if I'm going back to my strengths, if I'm a good leader, if I'm a good collaborator, and I help others, and I do those things well, that I will be able to be successful, and I will be able to be given opportunities. And do I think if I look back that maybe there was an instance where somebody didn't choose me for a role or a position because I was a woman? Or probably. But I chose to focus on what I could do and how I could be more effective as a leader, as opposed to focusing on what somebody else may have thought about me. So I just, that was, and it goes back a little bit to my journey of when I started out. I was like, why do I even think about that? But I still believe that, you know, focusing on yourself and what you do and how you deliver at the end of the day is most important.
We have more remote, but I'll give folks in the room a chance. Questions from anyone in?
Blake.
So you were at Apple while Steve Jobs was leading Apple. He's a pretty idiosyncratic guy.
Yeah.
Can you describe just what it was like working with Steve on some of the projects that you had to encounter him on?
Yeah, Steve, so if I was probably the anti-Steve. If you think about some of the things I just talked about today, Steve was brilliant. He's probably the smartest person I ever worked with in my life. And not just in the context of, product and marketing and brand and user experience. I mean, he was just incredible. I was telling this story to Christine, even in areas he didn't know. One of the things when I first went back to Apple, we used to recognize revenue on the phone because we were giving away updates to the phone, software updates. The way that the accounting rules worked, we had to recognize that over 24 months. So very quickly, because the phone was successful, we had $12 billion on our balance sheet of deferred revenue. And Steve Jobs said to me, well, this is the stupidest thing ever. He said, this accounting mumbo jumbo, he said, it makes no sense. The economic value of the phone has largely been given to the customer, and yet we have all this revenue so he said, I want you to go get the head of the Financial Accounting Standards Board and the International Accounting Standards Board, and I want you to bring them to Apple. So we did. And this is an accounting joke, so only you accountants will get this. He said to them, I don't understand this VSOP thing, but he said the economic value is just completely, this makes no sense. Okay, and Steve was enough of a rock star even in the kind of at that time because of that conversation. And again, he didn't understand anything about accounting, but what he knew was there was something fundamentally wrong. Because of that conversation, I worked with the accounting regulators, and we ended up changing the accounting rules for how we recognized revenue on the phone. And again, in his view, he was like, well, just go fix it. Go change it. Go change the rules. Anybody who's worked in that world know that that's easier said than done, but that's how he thought. He was not inhibited by the facts. Figure it out. And as a result of that, people did amazing things, including myself and my team, because we got that done. Very, very difficult. Really, really challenging man in terms of his interactions with people. He wasn't focused on, how to communicate with the employee base. We would have questions, and if somebody asked a dumb question, he would say, that's the dumbest question I've ever heard. And we had a lot of cleanup to do after that. So I'm not promoting the fact that that's the way to be a leader. He was effective at that, partly because he was so brilliant and the ideas were so brilliant.
Okay, we have a couple more questions for you, Betsy. What advice would you give leaders who aren't comfortable communicating to large groups, their whole team or the whole company?
Again, I think that communication is really important. It needs to be authentic. If you're somebody who's not comfortable standing up in front of everybody, yes, you can probably get some coaching and make yourself better at it, but don't go to Broadway. You're not going to be the person standing up and, figure out mechanisms to communicate that are conducive to what you're good at. Are you good? Do you provide good written communications? Are you better in small groups? Figure out mechanisms that work for you. And at the same time, if you do manage a large team and you aren't comfortable, figure out how to just get a little bit better. Again, no one's, I think part of, I just learned when I first started communicating in front of big groups, was I necessarily comfortable? No, I just have done it thousands and thousands of times, as has, Scott and Blake and others. And the first time you look out and you're like, oh my God. The good news I was telling somebody is I don't see that well. So I pretty much, once I get beyond a certain row, I'm like, well, I can't see them anyway. So that's okay.
I have several more from remote locations, but folks here.
We have a question here,
Oh, good.
Christine.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. I live from a perspective that I think people are more altruistic than they give themselves credit. With your thought of you must be a mentor, maybe not everybody knows their mentor, feels their mentor, or say, I don't even know how to start being a mentor? Could you maybe provide some advice on that?
Yeah, I think mentorship takes many forms. All of us are friends. We have friends. We have people that are colleagues. And it takes courage, let's say, because you have a friend that's a colleague, and maybe they had an experience. Maybe they gave a presentation, or they gave you a chance to look at one of their articles, whatever the case may be. The easy thing to do is to say, well, I don't know that. I think there's some issues in there, but I'm not going to tell a person because it's not my job to do that. So what I'm saying is mentorship can take many forms. And for us as women in particular, don't be afraid to take those risks, even in an informal sense. Your sister, your colleague, your friend, to be able to say, hey, and you don't have to make up stuff if there isn't anything there, but we all get those opportunities to be helpful to someone. And oftentimes we're not willing to kind of go out on a limb, again, because we don't think it's our job, or we're like, I don't want to hurt the person's feelings by doing that. But we can all, if we help each other by being willing to give feedback in a constructive way, everybody's better off at the end of the day. If that makes sense.
How do you go about asking others for feedback so that you can, in essence, help yourself solidify your secret sauce to then help others?
Yeah, I'd like to think that most of us have good managers. I'm kind of being funny there, but most tech companies, most people grow up in tech companies in technical disciplines, and then they're so good at technical disciplines, we make them a manager, and then we don't give them any training or anything, and then they learn how to be a manager on the fly. So oftentimes our managers are not great. There's tons of mechanisms, whether, again, if we do have good managers, there's tons of mechanisms to use stuff online, to use kind of resources that are available in books, through our HR department, to really kind of try to understand what are, in the best case scenario, is to kind of get a 360 feedback. So to understand, what our boss thinks of us, what our kind of colleagues, people across the organization, what do they think of us, and what are the things that they think we're really good at, and what are the things that maybe that we could work on. So if there's not a mechanism within your kind of day job where your manager is able to do that, don't use that as an excuse. Go figure it out. Find a book, find something online, go to HR and say, how can I do this? Get feedback, try to understand, what are the things that I'm good at, and what are the gaps. And again, the good thing is to be self-aware about, okay, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to focus on those things or try to improve the things that you're maybe need to work on, but don't lose the things you're really good at. I worked with somebody who was a communications person, and her secret sauce was getting stuff done. She didn't matter. There was never any rules on how you did anything. She had to just figure it out. Could she have been a better communicator in terms of written communications? Yes. Could she have, that stuff was hard for her. But that was an example, she was a get stuff done, and that was her secret sauce. And so, again, I think, and I actually had this because she helped me with this presentation, actually, even though she doesn't work for me anymore. And we talked about it, and I said, what do you think your secret sauce is? And she says, I get stuff done. And so, again, I think trying to understand what yours is, and maybe you have to do a little work. Maybe you have managers who help you, but don't give up if you don't have that mechanism with your current manager.
Okay, some people have trouble taking credit for success. In your opinion, Betsy, how important is it to take credit, or do you have tips on how to do or not do this?
Well, I have a mixed response to that, because I tend to want to give the teams credit, so I tend to not be somebody that stands up and says, "Didn't I do a great job?" Especially as a leader, usually I didn't do that much, and so again, I think it's important to give the team credit. But the one thing I will say, and I've learned, is it's important for your manager, the people that you work with, to know what you do. And if they don't ask you what you do, or they don't know your results, it's okay to communicate and to say, again, here, and maybe they're not great at giving you goals, have your own goals. And then communicate to your manager and say, here, just keep them up. If they're not asking you what you're doing and the progress you're making, the success that you're having, it's okay for you to tell them. It's okay for you to do that. And I actually, I would say that's something that I'm not that good at, because again, I was always focused on, hey, if we just get it done, it'll be okay. But it is important, particularly if people are not, maybe they're off doing something else and they don't really know what you're doing, make sure that they know what you're doing.
Hi. I loved what you said about starting to golf when you first started your career, because I actually did the same thing in the early 2000s, so I could close deals on the golf course and earn that respect that maybe wasn't there. What advice would you give to other women on coming out of their comfort zones and doing something similar so that they could maybe boost their confidence or earn respect in an arena where they don't feel that they have it?
Again, I think that I got asked a lot, should I learn how to golf? And again, I go back to only if you want to golf, because golf is a really frustrating game. And so I wouldn't do it just because you think you're going to network. As it turns out, I'm like on the GoDaddy is like the greatest board for me because everybody golfs, and so I love it. But that's actually somewhat unique. What I would tell people is that if they're not confident in certain elements, figure out some things that you can do to develop that confidence. Sometimes that's there's courses that you can take in terms of to develop your confidence. Sometimes people can get a coach. Sometimes if that's not appropriate given where you are in the organization, go find somebody who's really good at it. And figure out how, kind of what are some things that I can do so that when I show up, my communication style is going to come across more confident. It's interesting when I've seen a lot of women do is use phrases like, well, I don't know really whether this is the right answer or not, but I was thinking, or I don't know if this would work, and sometimes we've just discounted our idea before we even get out the door. So also be aware of, okay, if I'm in a certain situation and I'm not confident, make sure I don't do things like that to kind of undermine kind of what I bring to the table. Sometimes it means we just need to do a little more homework. I also think sometimes from a gender standpoint, if you ask a male colleague, hey, I think I'm going to ask you to, consider this new position. The guy's like, he maybe has no experience in that job. Yeah, I'm signed up, ready, good. You ask a woman, okay, hey, do you want to go do this job? She tells you all the reasons why she can't do it and all the reasons why she doesn't have that experience. The same person over here generally says, oh yeah, I'm good. So again, just think about, again, how you respond in certain situations. There's mechanisms around coaching, resources through HR, stuff on the web, on your friends, mentors to help us do that. Thank you, Blake. I know you guys got to go.
Great job.
Thank you.
Do we have time for one more?
Yes,
Betsy?
we do.
Well, I think we have one in the room, and I have one remote. So
Great.
the remote question, was there ever an incident where you realized you were being treated differently because of your gender? And if so, how did you handle that?
I would probably have to say yes, but again, I don't really, because I wasn't focused on that. I also grew up with brothers, and I grew up with kind of being a little bit of a tomboy. So I always did a lot of stuff with men, so I'm very comfortable in that space. And so I'm sure there was instances where maybe somebody said, oh, well, you know, I mean, what is, you know, that they, but I just tried to not focus on that. And because what were my choices at that point? And I use whether it's an executive room or a boardroom, I'm going to raise my hand and say, I'm sorry, you don't like my question because I'm a woman. That's probably not going to, you know, move forward the conversation. So what I would do is say, oh, okay, if maybe I thought somebody discounted my opinion, I might figure out a way to go get to that person after the fact. But I would tend to do that in a roundabout way, as opposed to, you know, again, I'm going to raise my hand and say, you know, this is a problem.
Hi, thank
Hi.
you so much for speaking. I could really identify with you both in name, because I have the same name, but also with some of your attributes, as well as being a tomboy growing up. As I've grown into my career, I've found that I've also grown into a lot of confidence with my career.
Yes.
And it's been amazing. I've really appreciated that asset, and I've utilized it. Although I will say there are times, and I could be overly analytical about this, but there have been times in my career where I worry that maybe I'm too confident or coming across too brash at
Right.
times. Have you encountered anything like that? Do you have any feedback or suggestions maybe in how to move forward with that type of scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me personally, it was never about dial it up. If anything, it was dial it down. Again, I think going back to being an effective communicator, being authentic, you know, if you get to the point where your communications are too confident and you're discounting others, you know, I'm one of those people that gets really excited and passionate. And there were times in meetings, you know, I just couldn't help myself. It was just coming out. But there may be other people in the room who are more introverted. And if you're not making sure that you're giving them a chance to speak, people can perceive you as, you know, brash, you know, overconfident, you don't listen. And so I think people who tend to be on the overconfident side, our challenge is to make sure that others get an opportunity to have a point of view and that we listen and that we don't discount others' ideas. So very, very important if we tend to be the, you know, type A, you know, over the top personality.
Betsy, thank you. I think you'll be here for a few minutes once we wrap.
Yes.
So to all that came in person and for all those in remote locations, thank you for your participation. Thank you for your questions. And look for updates on our next speaker. Betsy, thank you very much.
Thank you.